Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler. This thing is getting more and more interesting, and I find myself with a touch of redundancy. But it's redundancy because I read the comments. I read them all. When you guys get a response, if you care, but if you get a response from me, it's me. Nobody else even has the codes. And I tell you that because when I tell you I go through the comments, it's not just something that I say, and I share that because I can't help but feel that I have been misunderstood time and time again. I mean, there was a piece on Conor versus Chandler where I was going to stop. And I'd even told you guys, if this doesn't get done, I am going to stop. And this is back when it felt like hot, cold. And I was really feeling for Chandler. Like, I knew Chandler wanted it, but I also knew that Chandler deserved it. Red panty night, make no mistake, that's a very real thing. Anything in life, if you're offered something, you have it, and it gets taken away. Right, like you'll hear the expression, to take candy from a child. Preventing a child from having candy is very different. Telling a child to not eat candy, it's very different. When you take it, that's when they have it, they're in possession, they're excited. Those decisions are behind them. Possibly they earned it, but then you take it. And I just tell you because I was feeling for Chandler. And there's a part of this process where I remember telling you guys, this is it for me. Conor's been jerking us around enough. If he doesn't do this, I'm out. Because it's starting to feel as though we are being used. And I'm on two sides of the we. Media, and I'm a fan. So he's using the media to jerk around the fans. I'm part of it. I'm going to get out. Well, it turned out that Conor's hands were clean. As a matter of fact, Conor was very sincere. Conor is the one that had to go to backyard tactics with the company to get this fight. But it's relevant that you understand that because it speaks to the grit, it speaks to the will. It speaks to, does Conor want to do this? And so many guys that fight for a paycheck, and I've heard that expression, I've seen it happen, but you got to understand the order of events, which is there's a fight, you guys get behind it, promoter gets behind it, they call the guy, they go back and forth with him, and he finally agrees to it because the money is so good. That's just not what happened here. Conor was the one arguing. Conor was the one fighting for himself to get the fight, which happens to be opposite Chandler. Chandler was subsequent to Conor's motives. He personally wanted to compete. He personally wanted to be back part of this community. He wanted back in that kind of a spotlight, back in front of you guys, back in that lifestyle, back in the discipline of training I'm sharing with you. It's relevant. And I think that we need to make sure that we give Conor his due for that because we don't know what's going on here. But there's something going on here. And I was talking with Ariel earlier. And Ariel is the closest to coming out and telling you guys this fight isn't going to happen. He's the closest. But he's not saying those words because he cannot run the risk of being wrong, right? That's how you become 12-time Journalist of the Year. As a matter of fact, I think he's 13-time. But every word you use matters. And when I look at that scenario of what Ariel is hinting towards or letting us know is potentially going on, it's not Conor calling up and going, hey, I'm out. It's not. It's that the UFC is going to step in and pull it. And Conor missed a press conference. Now, you guys are going to have to hear what I'm not saying, okay? I got something. Doing the best I can, but I can't hand it to you. So you got to hear what I'm not saying. Conor missed a press conference, okay? The very reason that he had to miss the press conference, the very reason that forced him to not be present for that event is what would lead him to not be present on June 29th for the fight with Chandler. And this is now somebody else's decision. It is somebody else saying, you weren't going to fight. And that's how this whole thing started, right? History has a very interesting way of repeating itself, even in the short term. We got this fight with people saying, we're not going to sign off. We're not going to do this fight. This isn't going to happen, at least on certain dates. UFC 300, by example, and June 29th, where it is going to happen, first was said that it's not going to happen. And I'm only bringing that to you because that was somebody else stopping Conor. There's some piece of information that is out there. And deciding on what to do with that information seems to be a little bit of a hot potato, a little bit of musical chairs. And if the UFC was to be the ones that stepped in and said, no more, That is how Dana White's mind works. That would actually be consistent. It wouldn't be the first time that this has happened. Nick Diaz did not show up for a press conference opposite George St. Pierre, and Dana White said, I think I'm going to cancel the fight. And Dana just did this public negotiation with Nick, but he was very serious, and he said, you told me you'd be here. If I can't count on you to be here at a press conference where there's no punches thrown, I'd be a bit of a fool to expect that you're going to show up for the fight where the rules are pretty limited, right? I mean, that's an excellent point by Dana, and it's a very fair point by Dana. Tie in pro wrestling. There's a guy called the Ultimate Warrior. And the Ultimate Warrior just did not want to be a wrestler. He wanted to make money, and he was in it for himself, and that's fine. But he was one of these guys that was very open about that. I'm not doing the job. I'm not putting anybody over, and you're going to have to pay me a whole jackpot just to get me to go out there and do what I've already agreed to do. And it's going to be hard for you to stop because you've pushed me already. I'm the biggest draw. I don't need your push. And I'm your number one merchandise mover. It's going to be hard to pull me down. And this was his attitude. Rest his soul. But this was his attitude. And it got to the point where there would be house shows. There would be kids like me and my buddy Justin Wolf. We'd beg our parents to get us tickets because Warrior was coming to Portland. And you'd get those tickets and you'd go down and you'd be excited. House show means you have to be in the house to see the show. And Warrior wouldn't show up. And we would be devastated. But he was doing this all over the country. And it was to the point that Vince told him, now, whether this is real or not, you don't have to call me a mark, but Vince told people that the Warrior has to put up a $50,000 surety bond. He's got to put it in escrow for every card that he gets assigned to. If he wants the assignment and he wants the job and he wants his contract, first he has to put a $50,000 in escrow. Well, he's doing 2 and 3 and 5 events a week. And Vince said, you're going to do it because I'm refunding tickets if you don't show up. And all of a sudden, the Warrior quit skipping events. He started being present. So whether I'm a mark or not, the timing makes me think that something to that degree, and it might have been more like $5,000, but something to that degree actually did happen. And if the UFC's hand is forced, they want to bring you the absolute best show. But they also ran into problems at UFC 300 where people were giving resistance. And Dana's going, man, I got a whole locker room full of hammers. I can bring you what nobody else in the market can, but that doesn't mean it's what I necessarily want to bring you for certain events. And Errol Hawani had predicted it'd be George Masvidal and Nate Diaz, right? They got this boxing thing coming up. Hey, pull the boxing thing, stick them into the cage. And I'm light on that idea only because that was attempted to be done at 300. And it was the UFC side saying, that isn't what we're going to do. So I don't think that is the situation, but you do have to ask yourself, what is more important? You have UFC 300, who at the time, right, I understand this was only in April, but at the time, 300 was to be the biggest and best event ever. That was absolutely the goal. And by that, I don't mean excitement after the fact. I'm talking about the anticipation leading into it, the card, the most stacked card of all time. So think about that. Think about what you're willing to do. And while you're willing to do that, and while the fans would love to see Nate Diaz versus George Masvidal, you're not going to do that, though, right? But just think about that. What are you more motivated to do? What are you more inclined to do if you're in that position? Show that kind of respect and make those kinds of considerations for UFC 300, which is supposed to be the biggest and best card of all time, or make those types of considerations on an event that has, by far, your largest box office ever done. And it's just one of those things, right? It's one of those things where you're not crazy to side with Errol and think that that could be one of the possibilities. I do not think it's a possibility, and I'll see that possibility. I'll raise you another one. We know that Duplessis and Adesanya are going to fight. We believe they're going to fight in Perth, but that fight hasn't been announced. Wow. So those guys know about each other. Those guys have agreed to each other, and those guys can still fight each other on June 29th. That's just a possible suggestion. I'm just suggesting for you that there are possibilities. And if the fight is off, Conor did not call it off. They would have called it off. And that's just not a situation that they're going to put back together. I mean, you think that Dana White didn't learn in the Nick Diaz because he ended up booking Nick? Well, yeah, you're right, he did. He did. And to this day, 11 years later, Dana has never booked or invited Nick to a press conference again. So don't kid yourself for any amount that the boss doesn't learn from the past. The past is in front of us, right? I mean, this is still June 29th, but whatever happens is going to have long-term rippling effects. That I can tell you.